Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Show. I am your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and today I'm joined by Gerbrandt van Heerden. Harry, how are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. At least I'm not experiencing the extreme heat that you have there in the
Oh,
north. I
yes.
hear. Mm,
Indeed. I'm
mm.
also joined today by Marius Roodt. Marius, how are you?
How's it, Nick? How's it, Harry?
So,
I am baking in this horrific Gauteng heat right now, so I apologize to any listeners if you can hear my fan in the background, but quite simply, I'm not turning it off because otherwise I may expire at my desk. Anyway, let us get into the news of today. And the first story we're going to talk about today is this is actually one of those ones that's sort of, in the global culture wars is a kind of recurring topic that comes up and up, which is what level of involvement should sportsmen have in politics and commenting on political issues. And the reason we're talking about this today is that there's a board meeting of Cricket South Africa this weekend, and they're discussing a variety of the normal issues that they would at a board meeting. But one of the issues they're going to be discussing are comments made by South Africa's under-19 captain, David Tiger, who was recently at the ABSA Jewish Achiever Awards, and he was given an award, the Jewish Achievers Award there. And he said, yes, I've been given this award, and yes, I'm now a rising star, but the true rising stars are the young soldiers in Israel. So he basically dedicated his award to the young soldiers in the IDF. The Cricket South Africa board chairperson says that his comments would be discussed at the board meeting, but didn't elaborate further as to what this means. So it's not clear whether they're going to punish him or whether they're going to let it go or whether they're just going to, decide to not really comment on the matter. The SA Jewish Board of Directors has said that he was entitled to his opinion. There was nothing inflammatory about his comments. They were of personal nature, expressing his deep-held support for the Jewish state and mentioning friends and family in Israel being impacted by Hamas's terrorist attack. Every other South African is permitted to express their views on international issues, especially when people who are close to them are among the victims. So, I guess, Marius, let me start with you. The question is, and we've seen so many examples of this, I think, around the world, where you'll have some contentious political issue, it doesn't really matter what it is, and at some point a celebrity and I think more interestingly, a sports person will comment on it. And I think these comments are pretty tame by comparison to some of the things that people occasionally say on issues. But, when you represent a national side, so I'm not talking about someone who just plays like for a club or something, should you be more circumspect in how you talk about political issues? What's your take on this?
Yeah, I'm quite conflicted on this because I do think if you're a national sportsman, or even just a professional sportsman, you should probably keep your political views to yourself, I think. But in this case, David Tiger was speaking. It was effectively a private event. He wasn't speaking after a game and where he just represented South Africa and giving his views on the issue on the Israel and Palestine issue. So it's a bit tricky. But at the same time, CSA has allowed kind of politics CSA has pushed certain kind of politics. It's forced the team to take the knee for Black Lives Matter. Quinton de Kock, who didn't want to do it for whatever his reasons were, I don't think we need to interrogate that. He wasn't allowed to play a game because he said because the team was told everybody has to take the knee. If you're not going to take the knee, you're not going to play. Quinton de Kock was okay, that's fine. He didn't, and he just before the game started, he was taken out the team. Subsequently, he did take the knee, and you could see it was something that he wasn't too happy about. So it's pretty complex. But I think with this issue, I've been thinking about it a lot. I think with Tiger, what he said, it's okay, as I say, was effectively a private function. But also, at the same time, South Africa is, to use a bit of a cliche, South Africa is a diverse country. And there are people who support the protests who are going to have very different views on what David Tiger said about the conflict in Israel. And, for myself, as you guys know, I'm quite a big cricket fan. And if somebody like Kagiso Rabada came out and said he was massively, even if he was saying this, at a crowd event, and it came out, Rabada said he was a massive fan of, say, Julius Malema, and he thought we need things like expropriation without compensation. I think it would be quite tough for me to carry on supporting the Proteas. So it's, yeah, I don't think Tigo should get into trouble for this at all. It was a private function that he was speaking at. And it's not great that, I don't think CSA should be kind of policing what cricketers are saying at what are effectively private functions, And another thing you could actually say is we've had players after a game, be very open about their religious beliefs, which is fine. For some people, they might also not be, comfortable with that. Players thanking God and praising God and so on after a game. I think that's fine, but some people might not be happy about that. So it's all pretty complicated, but also at the same time, I don't think we need to. We shouldn't really worry about what a sportsman's political views are. They're sportsmen. They're famous or well known because they're good at playing cricket or rugby or whatever the case is, not because of their particular views. But it's also, it's the hypocrisy of global sporting bodies. With the Premier League as well, in the English Premier League, the Football League in the UK, players also had to take the knee for BLM and all that kind of stuff, which is fine. But then Mesut Ozil, German-Turkish player who played for Arsenal, when he started saying things about what was happening to Muslim Uyghurs in China, he got sanctioned for that. Why can people say certain things? Why are certain politics above board and certain politics aren't? Either people should be allowed to say whatever they want, or they should keep quiet on all issues. It's this hypocrisy of global sporting bodies.
No, I definitely agree with that. There's a lot of messiness in the way this sort of is handled, and I think you've kind of got it sort of right there. We really don't want sporting bodies to be harassing people for what they say. When someone agrees to become a sportsman, I do think that on a certain level, they are agreeing to kind of try and put their best foot forward, particularly when they're representing a national side. But at the same time, it also doesn't mean that they would suddenly lose all their rights to free speech. So I think, you sort of got to have a little bit of an approach here where sportsmen, I think, as a kind of, I think it is becoming of them to try and, not get involved in contentious political issues. But at the same time, there shouldn't be hectically sanctioned for that sort of stuff. But, I think that the thing I agree with most of what you said, Marius, was that we really shouldn't be looking to sportsmen for their views on politics, because at the end of the day, they have a platform and they are famous, but, they're just as well informed as anyone, really. So I don't know why people do take it that seriously. It's the same as, when an actor endorses some issue, I'm like, well, this doesn't change my opinion at all, because there's, this person is great at making movies, but it doesn't really mean anything else. Kerry, what's your take on this issue? Your thoughts on, am I right to say that there should be a sort of social pressure on sportsmen, not maybe to say things too political, but no sanction? What's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I am also, well, first of all, I lost my internet connection. So if I repeat some of your sayings, I apologize. But I'm also a little bit on the fence regarding this. If you, that's being part of Cricket South Africa, that's his occupation, that's his job, and we all are expected to act and behave in an appropriate way that represents the organization in a good light. You don't want to say or do something that's going to put the place, your workplace, in a bad light. But at the same time, we do have freedom of speech, freedom of belief, freedom of association. And at the end of the day, he is Jewish. So it's expected that he would, not condone the actions of Hamas and be maybe supportive of the Israeli government or the Israeli military. Also, I think if our government, or if some of our government leaders can make telephone calls expressing support for Hamas, then I think this chap can also, just voice his opinion about which side he can take without extreme backlash. I think I'll leave it there.
Yeah, no, exactly. That is kind of the thing that sort of does stick in my throat about all this, the fact that this is even in the news, because it's not like he said, we must destroy Palestine or something like that. He just said, I support young soldiers in the IDF. And, in theory, you could even be supportive of the young soldiers in the IDF without actually endorsing the state of Israel. Because those are people in a tough situation who are doing something very dangerous. So anyway, I think this is all a little bit of a storm in a teacup. Marius, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think just one point. Everybody's free speech is limited to a certain degree. I mean, I'm just thinking about us sitting here. We all work for an organization that supports liberal values and so on. But if one of us had to go tweet something like saying apartheid wasn't that bad, or we don't need free elections anymore, we'd probably lose our jobs. So it's everybody has some limits on their free speech, depending on what your job is. Your employer might take umbrage to what you're saying, even if you're not saying it under your employer's banner or whatever the case is. So everybody has some limits on their free speech. I mean, that's just a fact of the world. And just as an aside, I haven't been able to confirm this, but I think David Tiga is related to Ali Bacher. And anybody who's followed cricket will know who Ali Bacher is. I think he's David or Ali Bacher will be David Tiga's great uncle. I think from what I've been able to work out. So I just found that quite interesting.
Indeed. Anyway, I hope that this is the last we hear of this issue, but knowing the way that our kind of crazy politics and stuff goes, it's probably going to come back at some point. But let's move on to our next topic, and this is about the South African Human Rights Commission has had a complaint laid with it by the leader of the Democratic Alliance, John Steenhuisen. He is accusing Cyril Ramaphosa of failing to protect the human rights of South Africa's children, specifically with regard to their well-being and access to food. He said in a letter to the South African Human Rights Commission, I hereby lay a formal complaint against the President of the Republic of South Africa for failing in his sworn oath of office to put the needs of South Africa ahead of other interests, thereby failing South Africa's 4.8 million children who are starving as a result. He bases that number off of a report by the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund, which found that 4.8 million of the country's 20 million children are starving. He said, I hold that this is a shocking and tragic situation that is a consequence of sheer negligence and disregard for the plight of our children on the part of President Ramaphosa, who alone has the power to intervene decisively. Instead, he has allowed this human catastrophe to unfold, even as the catering costs aboard his presidential jet run to 24,000 Rand per person for a single flight. And then he goes on to say that the DA has several suggestions for what he could do to absolve the issue, including spending 26 billion Rand more per year on the child support grant, as well as reducing VAT on various food items. There's already some food items which you don't pay VAT on, but the DA wants to expand this. So, I mean, there's, I think, two parts to this. One is, laying a complaint with the Human Rights Commission. Marius, I'll start with you again. I'm kind of always a bit frustrated by the Human Rights Commission. It's always this kind of body that sometimes I think says silly things, sometimes it says good things, but it always seems to have a bit of an awkward place, I think, in what it can actually do or how much change it can actually affect. This does seem far more like a political issue that should actually kind of be, I think, beyond the South African Human Rights Commission. But secondly, what do you make of the proposals that Steenhuisen is putting forward here to try and address the issue? Obviously, the fact that so many children are very poorly fed in the country is an enormous crisis, if not one of the biggest crises facing the country. How can we start to turn this around?
Well, the way you can turn it around, I think, is through economic growth. And that's not something that's going to happen overnight. And it's not going to happen as long as the ANC is in power. And you're right, this is actually a very big crisis because, as I understand it, malnourished kids, they have lots of problems later on in life. If you don't get fed properly when you're a baby and a toddler, there's all kinds of implications for your body's development, also your cognitive functions, all kinds of things. And these problems that you have throughout your life. There's just going back to cricket, if I may. There was a guy who played cricket for South Africa called Mfuneko Ngam in the early 2000s, and he was like really broke on the scene. Was one of the quickest bowlers playing international cricket at the time. After 3 tests, he only played 3 tests for South Africa because he got a stress fracture, and from the doctors at the time said they thought it was probably because he was malnourished as a kid, and his bones hadn't then weren't as strong as they should have been for somebody of his age and size and so on. And that's just one example, and that's what that guy's career was ruined because of malnutrition. And that's just one person. So think about all the other people who've suffered from malnutrition in South Africa. And this comes down to being an economic issue. I think people simply can't afford to feed children properly and so on. And we're sitting with quite big problems later down the line. As also, I don't think the Human Rights Commission can do much about this, but it's. I think this is also. We're really in election season. I think this is probably actually part of the DA's election campaign, to be honest, which is fine. It's a good way to get an attention issue and show that the DA is kind of a caring party and so on.
Kerry, what do you make of this? You guys at the Center for Risk Analysis recently put out a review on the grant system across the country.
Yeah, it's a horrific situation. 5 million children going hungry in this country. It's like Marius said, our socioeconomic situation is so bad. Millions of households can't afford to buy the basic essentials. And, children who are malnourished, that has knock-on effects for, their career prospects, being a functioning individual in society. And it feels to me the only solutions that the government can come up with is very reactionary. Get more people on the social grant system, exclude many different food items from tax increases. But we can't do that now in our current fiscal situation. There is no money. The National Treasury every year says that our fiscus is under complete strain. We can't raise taxes any more than we already have. And with the government's proposed social relief of distress grant, which we also highlight in our social grants macro review, the government wants to make that temporary measure now permanent in the form of a universal basic income grant. Now, I've said previously on the show, I do think that there should be a social safety net, because there will always be people who slip through the cracks. But in order to afford a very generous social safety net, we have to have the type of economy that can generate wealth and resources to justify such a comprehensive cover. So the point I'm trying to make is that we have 13 million social child support grants, 13 million child support grants specifically that get paid out every month, and these grants are valued at around 500 Rand, the child support grant specifically. And that's barely enough to keep someone alive. The ultimate solution would be to have an economy that generates jobs, to have an education system that equips young people to one day get meaningful employment, to look after themselves, and to generate wealth. You can't generate wealth and financial security with meager grants of just a few hundred Rand So yeah, it's the government is trying in very active ways to solve the problem, while at the same time being the biggest obstacle to getting people out of poverty. Yeah,
Exactly. When people, there's this kind of assumption, I think, among some of the intelligentsia and some sort of maybe middle class people, that when you talk about economic growth, you're really just talking about, I don't know, making the capitalists wealthier, or supporting big business or something like that. But really, this is the result. What we're seeing right here in this report from the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund is the result of not having economic growth, which is nearly 5 million children starving. It is an enormous human cost. It is a horrific price to pay. And economic growth, tragedy like this is going to persist. The tragedy of poverty will linger in this country as long as we do not generate those jobs. And, never mind the rest of our social problems. That's just going to stick around forever. Marius, any final thoughts on this one?
It's like our colleague Chris Hutting likes to say, A is A. And I think that's exactly it. And, as you said, it's this enormous human cost, and the destruction of potential of literally millions of human beings. People who could have done all kinds of things, not necessarily become, Hollywood actors or played rugby for South Africa, but just people would have had fulfilling careers, made enough money to provide for themselves and their family, and being able to retire comfortably. And because of the country's economic situation, people can't. They live these lives of penury and being hungry all the time and despair, and it's because of the lack of economic growth in the country.
Exactly right. Okay, let's move on to our last topic for today, and this is about the South African Revenue Service's struggle to collect sin taxes, particularly from so this includes both illicit alcohol and also illicit cigarettes, things basically versions of these goods sold without paying taxes. And revenue collected by the government in the first half of the current financial year was 2.4% greater than the same period last year, but was 56.8 billion rand lower than estimated by the Treasury. So in terms of the Treasury's planning, our tax intake was way lower. And this is particularly affecting cigarettes, which ever since the cigarette ban back during the COVID period, government has seen an enormous drop in the amount of taxes it's able to collect on tobacco, as illegal cigarettes have flooded the market. And indeed, I believe the stats are something along the lines of illegal cigarettes used to be about 10 to 20% of the South African tobacco market before the ban on cigarettes, and now that number is, I think, over 50% on our illegal cigarettes. So, Kerry, in our pre-show discussion, the way I talked about this, as I said, I think from a certain point of view, at least the point of view of government and good governance and collecting taxes and keeping out organized crime, the banning of cigarettes during COVID was the most boneheaded, short-sighted, idiotic government policy that they have put forward in a very long time. It just was a complete disaster. It didn't do anything for anyone's health, and it created this huge boom in the illicit cigarette market. Your thoughts, Gary?
Yeah, absolutely. In the context of declining tax revenue, mostly due to very destructive government policy, the last thing you can, or the last thing that you should do, is willingly go and close the taps, the remaining taps revenue sources. There were plenty of studies worldwide that debunked the idea that people who smoke were necessarily more likely to die from COVID. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, that was one of her justifications for banning cigarettes. But all it ended up doing was force thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of smokers into the illicit market, the underground black market. And they haven't returned to the formal market now. So we can permanently say goodbye to a huge chunk of our tax. So it's incredibly devastating. I mean, maybe there was some vested interest or alternative political motives that may have benefited. I'm getting into the conspiracy theory realm now, but that would actually make sense if this was deliberately done to benefit certain political actors. I mean, this is an extremely corrupt country. I wouldn't, I think that is an unfortunate possibility for South Africa that was done deliberately. But the point is that we're now losing millions and millions of rands in revenue to this total unnecessary ban. I think we were one of the few countries, if not the only country, to ban cigarettes during COVID.
So just to put the amount of tax shortfall in perspective, the DA proposal to increase the child grant to help deal with the food stuff is 26 billion rand more per year. And the reduction, the shortfall in tax on tobacco products and alcohol is 56 billion rand a year. So in other words, you could have paid for it twice over. Marius, what do you make of this?
Yeah, I mean, it's you kind of like to see it, the government getting bitten in the bum like this. It also shows how the government kind of thinks of people as their subjects or their children, not really as citizens. Banning cigarettes and also banning of alcohol. I remember, I think it was end of 2020 or end of 2021 when Cyril Ramaphosa came on TV a day or two before New Year's Eve. He said alcohol is banned with immediate effect. And not giving anybody any warning. And cool, we can agree maybe alcohol is not great for you, but people need to make their own decisions. And also remember when Becky Cele, he said that we'll go to a high level of lockdown if people don't know how to behave. And lockdown should be not to do with how people behave. It should be to do with what COVID was doing. South Africans they don't belong to the government. The government's not the parents of South Africans. It's somebody that we voted in to manage the country. They're not the boss of us or whatever the case is. So, and also a lot of these bans, I think they were just knee-jerk. And I think what Harry was saying about the conspiracy stuff, it was all alleged and so on, but I would not be surprised if a lot of if there was a reason for the cigarette ban, is because of people in governments allegedly would benefit from there be more illegal cigarettes on the market. And as I said, this is all obviously alleged. I'm not accusing anybody of anything, but would not surprise me at all if this was actually the case.
Definitely. Anyway, I think that is all the time we have for today. So thank you very much for listening to the show. We will be back next week with the Daily Friend Show. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. And for those of you up in the north of the country, do your best to stay cool because it's really hot out there. Also, if you do enjoy the show, please remember to subscribe to us, like the video, and boost us in the almighty algorithm. Anyway, thank you very much. Have a good one. Cheers.